We are told by Paul that unless Christ is risen from the dead, then your faith is vain. There is no reason to continue with this Christian life. Many people have read that text. Unless Christ is risen from the dead, then your faith is vain, it's useless. And they see it as confirmation, not looking at the background as to what led up to Paul saying this. Here was a Corinthians church indulging in incest. They were denying the resurrection while speaking in tongues. So you have to ask yourself the question, who or what was talking through them when they were denying the resurrection, yet having a kind of pseudo Pentecostal experience, yet they were denying the resurrection. But what it tells you, there's more to it than the surface would like to show. It tells you that here's a background of people who, on the one hand, they were indulging in Diana worship and Isis. They were indulging in Greek and Roman paganism, while at the same time they were professing to be Christians. Yeah, they had no problem. It's a bit like Brazil and in Haiti, where the Christian missionaries converted the African slaves, yet they had no problem practicing their voodoo along with Catholicism. No, they had no problem whatsoever. They even have a section where they have Saint Peter, they call Dambala, and Virgin Mary, or what's the word, Azuli, etc. And so they just take the saints and they replace them for voodoo gods. This is how this is how they survive in different shapes. It doesn't matter what happens. People, if they want to survive, they will just change the language and continue, to do what they want to do. It's the same thing today. If, for instance, that there was evidence that Christ did not raise from the dead, and he did not exist. As Corinthians says, if Christ be not risen, then your faith is vain, because the whole thesis, the whole thrust of the Christian faith is supposed to be central around Christ and his redemption. But if he did not, what would happen is you'd have to look at the whole mega industry, the whole mega churches. They would still exist. Joel Austin would still exist. T.D. Jakes, Joyce Myers, they would still exist. And the reason being is because they're not about that. They're about a money empire. You know, it's a positive mindset building. Nothing more than a pyramid of motivational speeches that they put together and put a spiritual message behind it. So it would make no difference whatsoever. They would still continue to exist because it's a scam. It's a scam. You know, there's a guy who I joined. I think it's called himself Kool-Aid, and he makes videos exposing a lot of these fake faith healers. But the problem is how they get away with it is the members refuses, just like the JWs with the child sexual abuse, which are rampant inside the Kingdom Hall, and the members refuse to, you know, bring these elders to account, and that's how they get away with it, because the sheep are so brainwashed. They're not interested in the truth. They're not interested in digging deep and finding out exactly what does this mean. Instead, they rather follow people who are just in it purely because they're getting paid. So it would make no difference whatsoever. It would still exist because it's not about, you know, the central thesis as to what it's about. Instead, it became, you know, prosperity doctrines. It became about money. It's a business. Hence why you don't pay taxes, because you see it as a charity. And this is how my conclusion was that the church would still continue to exist. It would continue to exist because at the end of the day, they're about getting paid. They're about counselling and family feel-good get-together. You know, it's more about that, motivational pumping up. The likes of Joel Austin, T.D. Jakes, Kenneth Copeland would continue blowing COVID. They would continue the same stage tricks, even if it could be proven that Christ was still in the grave. Do you know something? Let me give an example. I remembered having a conversation, you know, this is during my Antichrist days, and I said to this Christian, going to church, and I said to this Christian, what would you do if you found out that Jesus was real? To which he replied, it didn't even ruffle him. Oh, I love the life. I love the life. In other words, he was in it for ulterior motives, the beautiful songs and get together. I love the life, so it wouldn't bother me. It wouldn't bother me if science, although I don't respect science, came out and said that you know, oh, Christ is in the grave and or whatever. It wouldn't bother him because he loves the weekly meeting. He loved the motivation. He loved the get-together. That's what keeps him going. In other words, he said he prepared to live a lie You know, if you've ever seen pastors who murder, how do you explain that when they got their wife's body in a fridge and week after week they preaching while they got blood on their hands, they got their wife's body buried in a fridge on attic, and they preaching week after week. You know, there's so many examples of people who will continue preaching, yet they don't believe it. They made a mistake regarding Donald Trump prediction. They said God was talking with them, the hand of God and the angels, and you know something, it all flopped because they don't believe. It's big business. They're in it because they're paid. But the problem is, a lot of dumb people, they don't want to question. They don't want to question. They want to believe it. I don't know what they get out of it. But the Corinthians church, what did they do? While they were indulging in incest and God knows what, pagan worship, they were also speaking in tongues. It didn't bother them. You know, shape-shifting from one place to another. Didn't bother them at all. And that's why we are told we have to examine ourselves closely. Examine ourselves. Because we put on a form of godliness, but really it's nothing more than a show. I keep forgetting to put my light on, but it is a good bright day. Yeah, so the church would continue. Another 1,000 years that they say the church number is declining. The church has become a big business. It's become nothing more than big business now. It's nothing more than a scam. No miracles whatsoever. You know, pastors arrested for tax, or what do you call it? That they haven't put their invoice in or something. You know, and still people follow them. Even when pastors get done for murder, and the members say that they're still God's anointed. And no wonder they said church numbers are dwindling. You can see because the devil seems to have gone into the church, and the good ones have left. The good ones have left and left the corrupt ones behind. You know, but what do you think? What do you think? Do you think at the end of the day the church would still continue if it could be proven that Christ was not risen from the dead? It would still continue because the church was not about Jesus to begin with. It was about money.